So, without being too contrived, can you tell me a little bit about your career journey and the scale and diversity of businesses you've led and advised?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started out running and investing in small businesses. It was a bit of an accident, to be honest with you. I was working with somebody at the time who was quite an entrepreneur and got involved in a whole lot of different industries at the very small scale, including a florist sundries wholesaler business. And an actual florist, which I owned and ran for a couple of years, and a financial services business. So a range of different sectors, learning how to run business and be a part of small business life. And really, I think a lot of what I've learned out of that initial experience is how to think differently, think on your feet, because in a small business, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of leeway, you don't have a lot of resources, and you have to be pretty innovative on a day-to-day basis just to keep things going, let alone grow your business. And then I was fortunate to enter into the corporate world and have spent about 15 years running HR teams, OD teams, talent teams, and HR business partnering roles for big businesses like Orica and Australia Post, Coles and AGL. And really fortunate to be part of some major digital and customer transformations, business model changes in those businesses that required a complete rethink of how work gets done and what type of capabilities the business needs. And a lot of that innovation, invention that I sort of had to pick up in the small business world, I was then applying to systemic organisational challenges. How do you prepare a business for a digital future if it's been around for over 100 years and has not been digital at all in the past? How do we deal with some of the macro changes that are going on in the market where small disruptors are taking away customers? And what does that mean for the ways that people work, the types of skills they need, how we organise, how we lead, how we form culture around that. So really, again, really fortunate to be a part of those incredible big transformations. But in the last year and a bit, I've struck out in a different context and applied all of that learning really into a business that I've called Hyphen, which is a management consultancy business. It's aimed very much at the small and medium enterprise sector. Going back to my roots, if you like, but bringing a lot of the skills that I've learned through big business in how to drive massive change through a business's core structure. And Hyphen really focuses on building the strength of the business. I call that intangible assets, but building the strengths that a business can then apply to its people, to its customers, to its suppliers, to the whole ecosystem that it operates in, which is extremely exciting, but very challenging to be doing that sort of work right now.
Yeah. What I've always really appreciated about you, and I know that others have too, is how two-sided your mind is. You have had a long and very successful career in HR as a box, but you think and operate and are very clearly a business leader and commercially minded, which I think is why you're so successful and able to advise business owners and C-level executives in equal measure as an equal, not just as somebody ticking a box around the sort of HR sort of box. So with that in mind, putting yourself back into that HR stream for 1 second, I'm going to ask you two questions in one. I'd love to understand what you think HR leaders should be prioritising and thinking about for after the crisis is over, because it will pass.
Right.
And equally, I'd also like to ask that same question if you're putting yourself into business owner, CEO mode.
Yeah. Now, in many ways, there is a separation, I think. I think the business CEO mode and HR mindset for after the crisis needs to be very, very aligned. So maybe I can answer it from both perspectives. I keep thinking about whole of person, whole of business, and whole of community, and maybe tackle them each separately. So I think we've become really, really, really conscious in this crisis of the whole of person aspect of work. I mean, we've been invited into people's living rooms and we see their pets and their children, and we get a much better sense, I think, of what's really going on in their whole lives. And in a way, we should have always been like that, but this has sort of forced that upon many businesses. And so I think when we, as an HR executive after the crisis, we should be not losing sight of the fact that we employ a whole person. And on the flip side, that people have vastly more capability than their job descriptions. Everyone does. And we are missing out on that because we haven't seen the whole person, and we're also missing out on a deeper employment relationship with individuals by not having appreciated the very big other half of their world that isn't their work life, that's their life. And I just think if we are able to appreciate as HR executives how amazing our teams are, how amazing our people are, they're not just their job titles or position descriptions, they're not just the person that turns up at work, then we will be able to reimagine and re-engineer workplaces to suit that potential much, much better. And we'll benefit from that as a business, and our people will benefit from that vastly. So when I think about whole of person, it's really important, I think, for HR executives not to bend to any pressure to rewind the clock or go back to how things were, but just to take that as an opportunity after the crisis to think differently about what employment really means and what that employment relationship really means. And then I think the same thing applies to whole of business, and this might typically have been more of a CEO's perspective, but I think HR executives need to be thinking about this just as acutely, because often it's the HR executive that is really skilled at starting these organisational conversations, even if the ideas are coming from elsewhere. So how you work with your CEO or your leadership team or your head of business to start the conversation about where the business is headed is really as critical as anything else. And look, the crisis, it's relevant right now, but what businesses are facing is a complete change in the way the marketplace is working. And you can't stand still when that's happening. So, the first question, we don't know what kind of economy we're going to be walking into at the end of this. We just know that it's difficult right now. So right now we need to be thinking, well, what market are we in? And how relevant are our products and services? And what are customers wanting to buy? How do they want to engage with us? Can they afford what they could afford yesterday? Many cases not. And I think, the CEO will be thinking about these things, but HR can play a really strong role in leading those conversations inside an organisation, facilitating, make sure that they're discussed, make sure that that there is a rich understanding of how much change needs to happen right now in the crisis just to survive, let alone how prepared you can be as a business. And there'll be plenty of opportunities to be competitively strong on the other side of the crisis if you are thinking about this early. So even if your business is not in crisis right now, there's no doubt that many things have changed in the way your customers engage with you and the way your employees engage with you, and there's still extremely relevant conversations for emerging from the crisis stronger as an organisation. And I think on top of that, then there are consequences of that. So if your market's changed and your strategy needs to change, then your organisation needs to change, and that's where HR executives can take another really positive role. There are some tough decisions to be made. There's no doubt that organisational structures may need to change, pay structures may need to change. You may not be able to pay your people what you paid them in the past. There's clearly IR implications of that. There's lots of change leadership and how you manage a business through that level of disruption. But if we have to realign to a new normal where the economy is not as strong as it was, then these are some of the things that HR executives are going to have to face into. How how you think about the values of the business in that time is critical. So if you aren't really strong on that as an organisation right now, it's important to be very strong on that. I think a lot of businesses have been very clear that they want to retain their employees through the crisis, and it's really helped them rethink what they could possibly do with their businesses. And in the long run, that may stand them in much better commercial stead than businesses that have taken some, maybe, they're always hard, but short-term choices. Yep. So they're starting with a values conversation to be really clear on what the organisation values and its principles, and then making those difficult changes to realign the business around whatever the new normal will be. And it'll be constant adaptation, and that's why HR is so critical.
Yep. I'm really interested in the observation that you made in now seeing and visualizing the whole of person, the pets, the family, and everything else that falls into the other half of that person's life, and how you've observed that it would be lacking to lose that whole insight and not be able to leverage that. How do you see that? How do you see if you were back in the seat of an executive leadership role or executive HR role in one of the big enterprise organizations in which you've worked, how would you see that playing out in real terms?
Yeah, well, a lot of organisations have talked about things like measuring output and not tracking input as much, but it's not really being put into practice in many roles in many organisations. There's still there's still a presenteeism. There's a when you turn. Yeah, okay. I was reading incredible story the other day, written by a young woman with a disability, not an obvious disability outwardly, but she's just said that this crisis has given her so much more access to social engagements, to be able to perhaps swap her commute time for time with that she needs to practice self-care, for example, particular exercises she needs to do in her life to maintain her health, and that nobody blinks twice when she wants to play trivia over Zoom, and I mean these are things that I think we can now incorporate into our daily understanding of how we get the most from people, and people are able to give their most, and that is by being less about input, more about the outcome. Yeah. That we understand the value of team interaction, and how much that contributes to productivity, and how much it contributes to feeling good about the workplace you're in, and that we are much more flexible with our policies, not just in writing, but in actual practice.
In actual practice, yeah. It's interesting. I think this, as many people have said, so it's slightly cliched now for me to repeat, but this is a huge exercise and a huge experiment in working from home, and how is that actually going to come out the other side, and what changes are we going to make around expectation and behaviours. And because productivity has been so impacted by all the other demands that we've got, like homeschooling as an example, I hope it doesn't have the opposite effect, that organisations are going to say, look, see, it didn't work because productivity dropped so vastly that we need to go back to being even more austere around 9 to 5 and expectations about being on site. So I'm hopeful that we see the whole picture of everything that's influencing our and impacting our time right now, and it doesn't go further the other way.
Yeah, there is some risk to that, isn't there? And I have already heard comments from organisations. Well, I hope for example, our call centre employees don't think that they can work from home forever now. I have heard those comments made. I think we have to be really smart about it. Obviously, not everything about having the whole family at home is fantastic for individuals, for families, and for the work. I mean, let's cherry pick the good stuff and recognise that, gosh, we really do value bumping up against our colleagues and walking down the corridor and saying hi and being able to have those small interactions. And we do really value the face-to-face collaboration. That's why we miss working in teams in the office. But on the other hand, there's a lot that's been incredibly, we've worked out, as you were saying to me earlier, Sarah, we've worked out as parents and as educators that when you have that intense one-on-one time, you don't need to spend as much time providing the same education at home as you would in a school environment where it's 1 to 30 or 1 to 25. Yeah. And I think the same is true when you think about productivity. I mean, it's not the number of hours you spend at your desk, but it's how focused your effort can be. And if you can deliver in 2 hours what in a different setting might take you 6 or 8 because you're running around going to meetings that aren't productive, or then we just need to recognize that it's what is produced that matters, not the time clock.
Yes.
And
yes.
So being smart about what we've learned, you're right. It's a risk that we bounce back and say, well, that was a failed experiment. But look, as much as we struggle with it, many of us are realizing how much value there is in working differently, even in this crisis. And I think those who are seeing the value in it, despite the challenges of caring for young children at home, are not going to want to let that go. So organisations will need to recognise where their employees are at. And the employees are already in a new normal. They will value what they get from their workplaces more highly than they did before, perhaps, but they'll also value the enrichment they had from their home, and from flexible working and the ability to exercise at maybe 5:30 instead of 8 o'clock at night, and all of those things. People will not want to give that up easily, and that'll become the new front of the talent wall.
Yeah, amazing. Whilst we are in this odd situation where everything is colliding and we have work and home life that is completely integrated, often quite challenging, are there any tips or advice or things that you have learned and observed that allows people to keep that parameter between work and home life?
Yeah, look, a lot has been said about that, I think. For me, there's, to some extent you can separate it and to some extent you can't in the current environment. So for example, I'm fortunate that we've got a separate room to the house that I can, which is where I am right now. So I can run away here, although it's in hot demand from the rest of the family. And we have, normal family routines like having dinner together and, evening walks and TV shows that we watch together that sort of separate the work time from the family time. So that I suppose it's daily rituals that help us keep that separation. But quite honestly, my son is studying a Bachelor of Music. And if my husband's on a Zoom and I'm on a Zoom and he's on the piano, somebody's not going to get heard. It's just the reality. And all of us have had struggles with what's going on right now to some extent, and you need to be there for people when they're going through that. And you can't say, well, just wait till the end of the day before we have this discussion. So so I think there are some things you can do to try and maintain routines, and even if it's rotating which room you are in the house, that everyone gets the quiet room sometime. But there's also a reality, which is that it's naturally going to blur because we're human, and that's the reality. I think it's really important, and particularly as female leaders, that we practice self-care. It's very, very easy to put ourselves last and to think that we're doing the right thing by everyone by doing that. And it's not the case. I mean, it wouldn't be the case if you're in the middle of a crisis on a flight. You put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and it shouldn't be the case now. And, as much as we might need to negotiate with our significant others or our workplaces about creating those boundaries, I think by far and away the hardest thing is to negotiate with ourselves and say, it is okay if I take that walk, even if the kids haven't got all their schoolwork done, and it is okay if I start that new meditation course I've never done before, even if dishes aren't clean in the sink and they can wait till tomorrow. And, that self-care is really critical. It is okay if I sleep. I'm a big believer in sleep, and I need a lot of it. So I've just had to give myself permission to take the sleep I need, and not to feel guilty about that. So
Totally. I think, you know, in my world, in the Invisible Partners world, where I focus very much on business leaders and or HR leaders, and not dissimilar to your own focus, you know, those leadership roles, those pivotal leadership roles, which are completely consumed right now with making sure everybody else is okay, and making sure that your teams are set up and their needs are being met and their mental health is being observed and protected. You know, keen for you to kind of extend those thoughts around as leaders and where responsibility for others is absolute. Is there anything that you would be advising those two groups of stakeholders to be considering around protecting their own mental health beyond what we've already shared?
Yeah. Yes. Well, the first thing is to recognise that to lead well, you need to start with yourself. And I think people in HR roles are often very hard. I find that very hard to do, and often CEOs find that very hard to do because they're, in a way, they put the business first and themselves last, and particularly businesses that are scaling and growing, and now businesses that are in crisis. So there's a degree of practicality, and you need to attend to the fires that are going on in your business right now, and absolutely have to be there for that. But in all other circumstances, there should be boundaries and balance, and making sure that, you know, this is different for everyone. So everyone needs to have a really good understanding of themselves, I think. But it's about creating energy reserves. I mean, it's no different from a sports analogy, really, where if you're a tennis player, you need to make sure you can recover between the points, both psychologically and physically. You don't have a lot of time to do it, but those few seconds, those couple of minutes, they really matter. So whatever you can do, whether it's if you only have a few seconds, it's about deep breathing. It's about making sure you're present for the next thing you need to do, not trying to multitask, because it's, as we know from brain science, that's impossible. You can't do it effectively. So trying as much as possible not to try and, you know, to focus on one thing at a time and be present, to make sure that you are able to be there for others in a meaningful way, and you can do more for them. And if it's not an immediate crisis, to be thinking carefully about your own energy, and whether this is the time actually to refill your own stock of energy before you go into the next thing. So yeah, I think HR executives, I mean, one of the other things that I found, you know, this is general advice, not for any particular role, but one of the things I have found personally extremely useful over the years is to be aware of the story I'm telling myself. And, you know, for example, you can make the situation so much worse by catastrophizing what's going on. If you're just able to step back and say, well, what's really happening right now? What's really here? What's really within my control, and not, then you don't have the overlay of all the other things that you might say are disastrous, or it shouldn't be like this, right? You know, if you're not fighting the reality, if you can just deal with the reality and be present, it's a lot easier to lead in those situations.
Yeah.
Look, as business leaders, if your business is in crisis, I mean, it's very difficult not to catastrophize. Well, what if I end up with a business that's insolvent, or what if my business collapses, or what if? It's much easier, and it's much more productive to be able to come back to the now and say, well, what do I know? You know, what don't I know? What can I control? Where do I need to get help if I don't know what I need to know? And the catastrophizing doesn't actually help in that situation. So what story am I telling myself about the current situation, and can I drop that story and just deal with what's here and now? And I think that's really important. And I think the other thing that helps with that is just gratitude. So what's great about here and now? What's amazing about today? You know, it could be very, very little things. Like I'm sitting next to a garden right now and I can hear the birds. I've actually got children's voices in the kindergarten next to me, which makes me smile. Those things, they may not relate to your business directly, but those practices of gratitude help bring you back to the here and now and deal with what you really need to deal with, and do what you can really do, and not focus on the things you can't control and actually can't do anything about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very, very sage advice. Even as a small business owner myself, having gone through the journey like everyone's going through over the last 4 or 5 weeks, asked me 5 weeks ago when I wrote my crisis article of everything is falling down around my ears to now, and taking some of that, applying some of the things you just shared around what's real and what's imagined and what's catastrophizing. It's like a different scenario. So I think dealing with the facts and the data and planning for rather than what you imagine is incredibly good advice. Thank you so much for your time. I didn't really thank you from the get-go, so thank you now for your time.
That's a pleasure.
I'm sure everybody that's listening will appreciate it too, so thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.